So now we're going to get stuck into our agenda for today, and I'm going to have the privilege of introducing our first speaker. And our first speaker is Dr. Deema Almasri, and she is a Senior Policy Associate at Earthna, and her expertise encompasses sustainability and the environment, water resources, water treatment technologies, wastewater treatment and reuse, and chemical engineering. At Earthna, she leads the water studies, where she explores fundamental local, regional and global challenges related to water resource management and water security. Dr. Almasri is also a research fellow at the United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment and Health. She was previously a scientist at the Qatar Environment and Energy Research Institute, where she worked on material synthesis and membrane fabrication for water treatment and desalination applications. Dr. Almasri received her bachelor's and master's in chemical engineering from Texas A&M University and her PhD in sustainable environment from Hamad bin Khalifa University here in Qatar. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Dr. Deema Almasri. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim, for the introduction. And thank you, everyone. And I'd like to thank AIPH and the conference or the symposium organizers for this kind invitation as a keynote speaker. I will be talking about traditional knowledge or practices towards sustainability. And while the topic is not exactly on green cities or plants or horticulture, it is very widely related to living green, and it's about the source of plants or plant life, which is water, and I'll be discussing more about water resource management from the traditional and sustainability aspect. So before I go ahead, I'd like to introduce Earthna. I'll give a brief introduction about Earthna. So what is Earthna? It's a couple of years old, and it's a center for sustainability. Its major ambition is to support sustainability by advocating evidence-based policy action, as well as providing encouraging changes in behavior in Qatar, and to position Qatar as a leading voice for sustainability issues for arid and water-scarce countries. We do a lot of work on policy analysis and advice, a lot of research on that has been going on in the country, both locally and at a global level, and we do a lot of research that includes sustainability test beds. A lot of them are included in Education City or Mashaded, and we do a lot of my coworkers do, and as well as myself do advocacy and outreach. So here's an example of Earthna's projects. Don't worry, I won't go through all of these, but I'll just highlight several projects that we work on. We work on sustainability frameworks in the circular economy in Qatar, as well as comparing it to benchmarking countries. We do a lot of research on energy transition and climate change. Biodiversity and ecosystems is one of our major research focus areas. We do studies on cities and the built environment, as well as education, ethics, and faith, and kind of linking education, ethics, and faith to all of these projects. So we do have a major program, two major programs called water security and food security, and that is one of the, I'm leading the water study at Earthna, and it's basically, it evolved to address Qatar's major water challenge by looking at sustainable water resource management approaches. This was initiated after we realized that some people wanted to dig more wells in the area surrounding Education City or in Qatar, and we wanted to do a water study to look at the water balance in Qatar and whether or not it would be sustainable to dig more wells or actually groundwater wells, or actually look into using other water resources. So just a quick background, I'd like to talk about Qatar's water challenges and why this is a very important study to do in Qatar that would be very helpful for not only Qatar but the region, as well as at a global level. So Qatar has, as we know, it's a desert, it has an arid climate, and it lacks surface water. The only freshwater source that it has is groundwater, which is currently being depleted at an immense rate, almost 5 times the rate of its the recharge rate. Most of the groundwater is being used in agricultural or irrigation. 70% of the groundwater is being used for fodder, which is a huge amount. And because of this, the groundwater is mainly used by the farmers, being over-extracted, and the quality of the groundwater wells has been depleted. So there needs to be, so Qatar needs to position itself in a way where it would preserve these groundwater wells. In order to meet the demands of the country, the potable water demands, desalination meets more than 99% of the potable water demands in the country. The water demand is currently 2.2 million meter cubes per year. Qatar has one of the highest domestic water usages in terms of potable water, which kind of leads to, not only because it's an arid country, but there needs to be behavioral change in that aspect. So as we know, desalination is mainly, in Qatar, is mainly uses thermal desalination, but the country, over the past decade, the country has moved towards using more reverse osmosis membranes in order to reduce the carbon dioxide emissions from that would come from thermal desalination. However, desalination in general, whether it's thermal or membrane-based, produces the byproduct stream, which is brine. And brine is currently being discharged, not only in Qatar, but throughout the world, into surface water, which may impact the marine life and aquatic life. So that needs to be looked into in studies, and that is one major research focus that we're doing. So now, these aren't necessarily water challenges in Qatar, but we really need to tap into non-conventional water resources that are available in the country to kind of maintain the water balance and have a sustainable future, a country that is resilient with climate change. So there's current focus on treated sewage effluent. Now that is being used and recycled in Qatar immensely. Treated sewage effluent is currently being used for irrigation as well as in cooling plants. And so that is because a mandate was set up by the country to reuse TSE. It's a water resource that we need to tap into. There's a lot of research on using shallow groundwater in urban areas, extracting those and putting them in aquifers, storing them in aquifers to be removed later on to be used for irrigation. There are other non-conventional water resources such as AC condensate, which is currently just being, it's not being used. You may see it whenever you go to buildings and you see just the AC condensate just dripping out into the area without it being extracted or used and reused. Rainwater harvesting is another aspect we need to tap into, as well as produced water from the oil and gas industry. That is one research aspect we're looking into in order to treat it and reuse it for other applications. It could be used for industrial applications. It doesn't have to be used for irrigation or agriculture. So just quickly going through Earthna's study. So the project that we are working on currently has 4 major components. One of them is a water balance for Education City. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with Education City is basically a research and education hub that was created by His Highness and Her Highness about 21 years ago, and right now it's managed by the CEO, Her Excellency. And basically, mainly this area over here, as you can see, there's a research center. The headquarters consists of universities that are local and international, schools. It also has a mosque, a golf course, and a stadium. So there's a huge amount of land that uses a lot of water. Currently, about 70% of the water that's being used for irrigation is based off of TSE, treated sewage effluent, which is a good step, and we're planning on increasing that to 100% within a couple of years. And that's one research that we're planning on doing, is kind of looking at what water resources are being used in Education City, starting off from this one, and creating a water balance for Education City in order to develop more sustainable practices, and doing a life cycle assessment as well as an environmental impact assessment on Education City. So we're doing that in order to, for Education City, we're starting off with that because we are based in Education City and we have access to data and information. And the challenge that we'll be facing for the smaller area in Qatar, we're hoping would fit into the bigger water balance environmental impact assessment that we'll be conducting for the country, which will also incorporate the Qatar's aquifer system. And another component is looking at desalination and sustainability in Qatar. How sustainable is it? Where does Qatar lie in terms of sustainability within the globe? Is it, because it does include a lot of technologies, what are the state-of-the-art technologies, whether it's for thermal or reverse osmosis membrane usage. So where does Qatar stand in trying to make it more sustainable for the country, for Qatar to be used as a benchmark? Another component that was recently initiated, and this is the heart of this topic, is traditional knowledge and practices towards sustainability. And I believe this topic would probably be interesting to everyone because it's a study that involves, it's a global study about traditional practices, and we all have tradition and cultural heritage, so it would be interesting to see the perspective of the audience about this topic. So it's a research and policy program that, as I mentioned, was recently developed last year, towards the end of last year. And what we're doing is basically we're looking into traditional resource management practices that have been done. And what can we learn from those that we can incorporate in the current modern time in order to improve the advancement. So we do know, we've done a lot of research, and we do know that science and technology has advanced many things, many fields. However, there's still that point of sustainability that technology has met, but maybe we can learn from traditional practices of our ancestors. There are a lot of resources and practices and knowledge that are deemed to be sustainable. So another aim is to preserve ancestral knowledge by connecting with the local traditional practices. And one aim of the program is we're not only going to conduct research and develop policies, but we do aim to include the local stakeholders and decision makers from the beginning, whether it's in the countries that we'll be looking into. I don't know why this is not working. Okay, so the program has several objectives, which includes looking into basically major aim is to preserve cultural heritage, merging the community with development. We do aim to look at several topics, and the topics which are not here right now we're focusing on land, water, and as well as food security. So this is basically, it reflects the previous presentation. There are several elements that we're looking to. It's a major, immense project. It includes water, food, traditional practices, built environment, ecosystems. But because it's and even all of these have their own several subtopics. And it can be an overwhelming topic if you think of it, but what we decided to do is to focus on some of the elements on the side, which is water, food, and land management. So the first phase of the methodology is to identify case studies that exist throughout the world that we can tap into. And these case studies, we decided to first start off with countries that have a hot and arid and semi-arid climate, which includes countries, a lot of the countries in the MENA region, and countries that have strong ethnographic documented knowledge. So an example of these countries, if you look at the MENA, we have Jordan, Oman, and Yemen that have strong food and security practice, traditional food and security practices. There are countries in Africa that still use sustainable low-cost systems, and then you have countries in Asia. There's India. It has had a massive empire and a lot of traditional knowledge based there. And we looked at countries, developed countries such as Canada, New Zealand, as well as Australia, due to the indigenous people that still hold on to their knowledge and still practice it. And so with this, we decided to map out the evolution of practices from a local context and see how we can, social and local context, see how we could incorporate any sustainability efforts from our end. So The selection criteria, so how are we selecting the case studies? We decided to select the case studies based on the areas of interest, as I mentioned, which is water, land, and soil. The water, land, which includes soil management, as well as food security. And we wanted to see the case studies from the sense of, is there potential for scalability of this? Are these considered to be efficient? What about their efficiency, their efficacy? Could they be suitable with the current environment? And we're also choosing these practices based on the quality of information that we will be receiving, as well as their level of vulnerability. So we will be aiming to focus on the endangered ones first in order to preserve them, and there are many case studies that are currently endangered. And we chose them based on the potential for policy intervention. So is there room for us to provide policy recommendations in order to preserve these practices, or to merge these, or to identify ways of merging the traditional practices with modern practices in order to have a more sustainable practice? So as I mentioned, this conversation will talk mainly about water, and there will be a huge focus on water resource management, water irrigation, water harvesting, which could be divided in terms of groundwater harvesting, rainwater harvesting, as well as fog harvesting. So this is where the fun stuff comes. So this is an example of, now traditional water resource includes groundwater-based irrigation. An example of traditional groundwater-based irrigation are the qanats. They're well known in Persia, Iran, Jordan. They exist as a flash system in Oman. There are ma'ayin systems in Yemen, and Morocco has the Qatar system. So they have different names, but they're based on the same concept, which is digging underground. There are basically underground water channels that are dug in order to tap into the groundwater table slightly. And then you can see from the image over here, the channel is dug at a slight slope where the water would go down through gravity, and then it would reach the irrigated land, and there are shafts that are dug in order to be used for maintenance. And these are actually still available in many countries worldwide. I believe I read somewhere that Iran still has 30,000 qanats that are still operating. Morocco has the Qatar system, which they're really heavily trying to preserve right now, and farmers are trying to preserve them. However, all of these systems have not been of much use ever since the diesel pump was introduced, which is technology, and with the introduction of diesel pumps, the groundwater wells have been over-abstracted, the water level, the groundwater level has decreased, and it's not very sustainable. It may be efficient in the moment, but it's not very sustainable. However, these practices are deemed to be very sustainable, and they have survived for thousands of years. Another example of surface-based irrigation is as-saqya. So as-saqyas, which comes from the Arabic word of as-saqya, which means a water carrier. And they're currently found in Spain, Mexico, New Mexico, Colorado, Peru, as well as a lot of places in North Africa. So why does it have an Arabic name, but exists in the United States, for example? Now, so as-saqyas were actually thought to be brought from the North Africans whenever they went and took over Spain in the 8th century. After that, the Spanish conquistadors found this technology to be very sustainable and brought it to the United States. That's why they're found a lot in New Mexico, as well as in Colorado and several places there. And this practice, as-saqyas, are deemed to be one of the most sustainable water resource management systems worldwide. And why is that? And it's because they are community-driven. So what are as-saqyas? They are channels that are dug, they're similar to the others, but these are channels that are dug above the ground, and they usually carry water from surface fresh water, from lakes, from glaciers, mountains after they melt. And they're very interesting, and many of you have been to Spain, you've probably seen them in Alhambra Palace, and I've actually visited, there's Spain, in a village in Spain where you actually see it. So they basically vote for members of the community, I think it's about 3, to basically lead or control the diversions of these estancias. So 1 week, one part of the village would have access to this water channel, and they'd close it, and the water would be diverted into another area. So it's very community driven, and we would like to look into see why this is, what drives the community to do this? Why is this considered to be very sustainable? It still exists. In Mexico, farmers are trying heavily to preserve it because it's actually preserved plants. So some farmers have said these estancias actually protected some of the plants that they've had for centuries. And removing these estancias would actually remove the ecosystems and the biodiversity that exists due to their presence. So this is another drip irrigation practice that's done, and these are basically clay pots. They're present in a lot of countries worldwide. In Spain, I think they call them ollas. I really hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And they're called, a lot of terms are used, pitcher clay pots. And basically they're clay pots that are dug about 3/4 underground, and water is placed inside of them. And so when the soil is dry, the water seeps out from the pores of the clay, and due to osmosis, if the soil is heavily saturated with water, because of osmosis, a natural phenomena, the water would be preserved in the clay pots, and so we won't have much of the water leaving out. So these are currently being used in small farms. Some local communities, some small farms and gardens in the United States are currently actually using these pots. A lot of people actually put them in their gardens before they travel because it's just considered to be a natural phenomenon that just happens by itself without anyone having to control the water. Of course, these come with their disadvantages. In clay pots, they could easily break. If there's a root can pierce inside of it and break it, and you don't have to manually fill it up. So that's an example of merging modern with traditional practices, probably using pipes and allowing water to go into each outlet by opening a valve and just doing it so that automatically. There was a recent study that was done by the at the University of Oregon last year. It was a thesis studying these and and it involves 3D printing dozens of designs in order to improve the efficiency, and they found that the original design that was done by our ancestors was actually the most efficient one. So it's very good to look and see why they use this, and why it still exists now. And we do know that it came out of practice due to the introduction of technology, pumps, and it can be deemed as be better than just flood water irrigation. So it's a good practice to look into and identify another type of irrigation. It's found in India. It's using bamboos. So bamboo pipes were widely used in India in order to be used instead of the current pipes for irrigation. So another water management practice is for flood and rainwater harvesting. These practices could be found. An example is the very well-known Wadi spate system that's found in Yemen. Yemen is known to have these systems, and basically water floods. Whenever you have heavy rainfall, it goes into water reservoir, and then the water and then there are diversions that are dug in order to kind of divert the streams and allow them to go into agricultural areas or to be used in certain areas for irrigation. There are sand dams that are currently being built in Africa. Kenya is a leading country in terms of using sand dams. And the Ahara Pines is a 5,000-year-old flood and rainwater harvesting system, which is very similar to the Wadi spate system, which basically takes the water after the rain and then it floods. It diverts the streams to reach local vicinities for irrigation. And you can see Yemen here. in its very, very good times. You can see they use different types of irrigation sources. So there's a well here that would gather rain, and there's the wadi space system that you can see the terraces and diversions for water to actually canal channels to divert the water sources, to divert the water whenever it rains. So another, last but not least, this is the final practice that we're looking into, is fog harvesting. So fog harvesting is not a new topic. It's actually thousands of years old. It's thought to be used heavily in Palestine, Egypt, Crimea, and actually in Palestine there's a study where it found that thousands of years ago, they found archaeological remnants circulating plants, and which would harvest the fog or humidity in the air, and the water would drip surrounding each plant. Fog nets are, a lot of projects are being used in Morocco. This is a project that is led by women in Morocco, and it has basically, and supported by the United Nations Development Program in order to put up fog harvesting nets in a local village. Fog harvesting is found in Yemen, Morocco, Spain, Peru, Chile. Chile has many projects. It's one of the leading countries applying fog nets and harvesting fog. This is an example of some fog nets that exist in Peru. This is a fog tower that was supposed to be erected in Chile, I think in 2020, but you can't find much about it right now, but I'm assuming COVID played a role in it not being put up yet. But this is an example of how you can merge traditional practices with modern technology. We would probably be seeing more of these in areas that have high humidity. So it's interesting to see how these develop and how they would improve management of resources, of water resources in different areas. So in conclusion, there's a huge amount of knowledge to be tapped into. We looked into many countries, we still are, and I do know that there are a lot of countries that we probably did not have a look at yet, or that would have traditional practice we would find would be very good to hear any of practices that the audience may know of. Future work will include looking at the other areas of interest for this year, which include land, soil management, agriculture as well as, and how these both help out in terms of food security. An example of that is Yemen, and we will, and Yemen and its terraces. We will also be looking at different reasons and identifying why they kind of were inhibited, and try to find what kind of policy recommendations we could actually implement in order to kind of preserve the practice in that local area. And one of the major aims is to identify the best means to engage in the community, because we believe that without the community knowing about this and agreeing to this practice, it won't be developed and it won't be that sustainable. So thank you very much, and I look forward to
Well, thank you very much. That was really excellent presentation, thank you. You are right at the heart of the biggest issue, I guess, facing this region. And it's fascinating to see the different techniques and the approach you are taking to look at traditional techniques, which I'm sure is a very sensible approach for that which has worked for so long and generations before, to see how that can be developed into the future and so on. So thank you very much. Really, it's fine. Please hold on 1 second. Just in case, does anybody have a question? There weren't any on the app that I saw, but if anyone has a question.
Thanks very much, that was really fascinating. Just a quick question about the practices you've got. A lot of them are still used on a very small local scale. Is part of your work to look at scaling up to be sort of larger, slightly more, hesitate to use the term industrial, but really scaling up those solutions once you've sort of researched them thoroughly?
Thank you very much. That's a good question. So we do aim to look at the practice and see whether it would be efficient to scale up. And some may be able to be scaled up at a large level, but some may not be. But it would be good to incorporate them in different farms and having different smaller villages or communities using them at numerous levels. But that is something we do aim to see. Whether it's doesn't necessarily mean making sure we will do scale up each one, but actually trying to see whether it is scalable. But if not, we will just preserve it at the smaller scale it is. But trying to see if it would be spread out. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And another question, please.
Hello, I'm Francesca Boyd. A really interesting talk, thanks so much, and fascinating to see all those different examples from around the world. I was wondering, in your method of collecting all that information and identifying case studies, were you able to visit a lot of places? Is it mostly through literature that you're able to see the tradition? And how is that knowledge exchange happening in terms of learning from other cultures and traditions and practices?
Thank you. So a lot of it has involved, there's research that we've been doing at the desktop studies. We do have we do interact with a lot of people that are international, renowned. For example, the Aflash system. Dr. Abdel Hadi from Oman, he did visit Qatar and gave a talk at the summit last year, and as well as we also have experts from the United Nations University, Inwa, that came and visited Qatar. We would love to visit those as well. I'm hoping we do get opportunities to visit, but it does involve basically people that come to Qatar that have had previous projects related with Education City or Qatar Foundation. Thank you.
A couple of questions first, both on that table. So.
My name is David Brassfield. I'm from the World Green Infrastructure Network, board member and secretary there. I think the organization I come from, and also AIPH, we are of course very interested in vegetation. And often when we're thinking about vegetation, we're thinking about how to use it for water stewardship, to manage too much water, because we're getting extreme precipitation events and flooding, etc. But you're talking about water conservation, which is quite interesting, and I just wonder if you have if you've seen any examples of where vegetation is being used for water conservation rather than flood management.
Yeah, so an example is one example that I presented is, for example, the clay pot irrigation technique, which conserves water because you don't use immense amounts. In Qatar, for example, there are some farms that are implementing, which is more modern technique, hydroponics and aquaponics, and so that's one technique of preserving water as well. There are many practices that we'll be looking into as well.
Thank you. One more down here.
Hi, my name is Aura Estrate from University College Dublin. My question is about, here in Qatar, how aware are citizens and stakeholders of the importance of these traditional techniques from a sustainability perspective? And how much do you think they would be willing to uptake them and maybe to introduce them in this context, or maybe include them in what is already happening?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Because this has been recently initiated, we are going around and discussing it. I'm not sure how aware they are of it, but they probably do know of traditional practices that have been done, but maybe the link between traditional practice and sustainability is not there yet, that we hope to kind of introduce and allow them to kind of think in from that aspect. But with time, we'll probably get more of an idea of how in Qatar, how very well versed they are or knowledgeable about this topic.
Thank you. I just have one question to ask you. Can you make it rain more? Because just thinking, that's not intended to be a silly question. Obviously, desertification happens when when landscape is removed. Yeah, so the desert comes and the climate changes. Can you reverse that? And is that something that will have an impact on water here, or is that just not something you're looking at?
There is, making water, there's fog harvesting. There's a lot of research and pilot plants that include atmospheric water generation. So that's one way of making water from the atmosphere. And there's also our neighboring countries working on cloud seeding. So that's another way. That's a modern technology, another way of using or making water. But we are looking into that. There are different ways. If you can change the terminology and say that we are making water in different ways. But yeah, it would be good to see the future of Qatar in that sense, with the climate change as well.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Our keynote presentation. Thank you very much.